We were continuing, or about to, our survey of how speech is now an absolute requirement for ordinary contemporary life and how it has in fact become a measurement of same. And we were last noting, if my memory serves me right, what happened to Valentine the Great? Oh. We were noting that as long as man talks about change, change seems possible even when it's not probable. And we were, I think, literally just about the place that we were noting that how talk assures, amongst other notable aspects, A, B, and C, that it assures that man experiences an ongoing process. It guarantees that man is free from nasty conclusions, and that as long as he is talking, the promise that man has of a future is kept. Now, a little more expansive than what we had time for last time was take the idea of the ongoing process. As long as man can talk, as long as he has a secondary world, and as long as he is talking, he is assured of an ongoing process. It becomes operationally that all or anything, any noun, any subject, can be kept operationally alive. It can be kept open-ended because by talking, a thing becomes verbalized. It is very tricky, as witnessed by this great response, to talk about this because the almost irresistible inclination is to take it as though it is some rhetorical comment and you can't see past it. But it has to do with the fact that the secondary world is like if you can see a comparable reflection, the secondary world would be to the primary world of man, somewhat is what I'm trying to convey to you now, that the verbalization of things being an ongoing process would have the same kind of relationship to the kind of abruptness, the kind of non-need for an ongoing process in the primary world. That is, primary needs being hungry, needing sleep, they are in a sense either met or not met. And if they're met right then, if you eat and you're just reasonably sane, you eat and you eat what your body more or less needs if it's available, and you eat about the right amount. And within a matter, they're closed down. It's not an ongoing process, even though it repeats itself, but at any given time you eat and you reach the point of being sufficiently eaten. And you stop. Whereas talk is not that way. Whereas the secondary world is not that way. And they're all tied together, the guarantee of a tomorrow, the freedom from conclusions, and so maybe we better run on and so it doesn't seem that strange. But what you're talking about, or what I'm referring to in this ongoing process, is that as long as man is talking about a thing, that it starts out and it appears to be without any doubt, and not rhetorical games, but it seems to be a thing. People talking about a God, people talking about some personification of evil, that they literally use that, but don't stop there, but they literally use that which would be, rhetorically speaking, a noun, a subject, a thing. And if we stop long enough, which I'm about to do a little bit, I guess, obviously, and you tried to take a vote, if I had Kyroots write something about there being a worldwide vote on which is the most important, nouns or verbs, if I threw it on you right quick, what would you say? What would your nervous system say? I'll go ahead and answer for you. We could debate it and I could go on, but if it was given as an either or, either the North or South Pole, that you have got to vote and you got to do the right vote, or at least you're going to be embarrassed, which is the most important? If it came to it and man had to have either just nouns or verbs, which would it be? I suggest to you, even though some of you may get slippery and be able to look around corners a little bit, humanity, given that, would just have to say, well, nouns, objects, things. First off, ordinary person says, I am a thing. what is the supreme signifier of nouns, if you ask ordinary people. And with a great deal of soul searching and effort, I believe that most of them would come up with the word I. It is the noun. Because if I do, I'm speaking now for an ordinary person, if I do not exist, who cares about the rest of that crowd? It's of no consequence whether psychiatry is a noun or a verb, or whether nouns are more important than conjunctions or whatever the crap you're talking about. If I don't exist, the rest of it's meaningless. So, if it was put that way, that even if it started out apparently some sort of question having to do with grammar and rhetoric and language, and humanity was presented with the question, which is the most important? If you had to just live with one, what would it be? Nouns, objects, things, or verbs? And they would have to say, well, nouns, such as food. I've got to have food. I've got to have shelter. Things are more important. If you're going to push us that way and make us admit it, then things without any doubt. If it's either or, things are the most important. If you could do that too, an otter or a bull moose, and everything else being equal and non-equal, then their response that things, nouns, objects, etc. would be the most important would be correct, because it would still be correct if everything was the same and still yet different. With you, with a human, in the primary world, things are the only thing of any consequence. If it could answer, if the primary world could answer. But the secondary world, that which is now inescapable, that which is now a minimum requirement for contemporary existence, if man is not an ongoing process, there is no secondary world. If an ongoing process ceases to be partly, or it ceases to have you as a medium, you would be, at the very least, unconscious. At the very most, you would be departed. But you would not be any longer intellectually alive, because to be intellectually alive is to be part of an ongoing process, and to be part of an ongoing process requires that you be able to talk. Even if your tongue is cut, you have got to be able to talk to yourself. Above the hypothalamus, up in the good old front room, where all the lobes hang out, you have got to be able to chatter. The energy has got to be to that level to where you can talk to yourself, or you are not an ongoing process. It is only the silent, it is only the primary that needs to be abrupt. It is only that, the primary, that can survive that kind of abruptness. Take the second part about man being guaranteed through being able to continually talk, being guaranteed of a state free from those annoying water stains. No, conclusions, that's it. Conclusions. Now, if anyone, be they part of the population of one of our national parks, well, some of you kind of snickered when I mentioned an otter, but I've received several nice letters from otters. But some of you, if you were keeping up with this, might at first think of me throwing in B, 2 of the 3 parts of man being able, through talk, to be guaranteed of being in a state free from conclusions. At first you might think that that could not possibly be correct. You might at first think that being able to talk, in fact, guarantees conclusions. What else would you expect over a range of rational, sane use of speech? Just a simple sentence, a declarative sentence. Unless it comes to a conclusion. That the world of speech, if anything, is headed toward conclusions that we could not even communicate. Sentences would make no sense if there was not a period, if they did not reach some conclusion. So it would be quite, as I say, if you were listening a certain way, you would think at first that conclusions have got to be the natural, expected, unavoidable, much less to say desirable, end of speech. It's not so. I assume by now, we've had a few minutes, I assume that anybody that might be seeing this has gone to the bathroom or changed channels. So now we'll get serious. Oh, I'm sorry. It would seem that conclusions, far from it being what somebody said here earlier about number B or whatever the hell they were doing, about that talk assures man, guarantees man to be in a state of freedom from conclusions. You would think contraire, and maybe even contraire again. That this cannot be so, that is insanity, finally run up in a large hot air balloon for everyone to see that you can no longer avoid it. It is just insane, because conclusions have to be, they have to be the aim of human speech. Not so. It appears that way. And that's why I went ahead and made the argument for ordinary life, but that is not the way it operates. The way speech functions in the ordinary world, what is normally thought of, and I am not stretching the word, but if I were talking to ordinary people and they followed this at all, what they would think of as being conclusions, and they would accept what I said, that a sentence reaches some point, human thought reaches some point, whether it be institutional, whether it be some large system of philosophy, or whether it be your personal views in life. What is apparently conclusions are actually, they're not actually final statements of fact. They are not. What would be more appropriately, or more appropriate use of the language for us to describe it, is what would normally be thought of as conclusions, as opposed to being a final statement of fact, are more like this. I always wait for a chord and there's nobody here. It would be more appropriate to call it like presently acceptable operational procedures. What is normally referred to, thought of as conclusions, whether the word be used or not, if man, again, if everything was equal and yet different, at a deeper, at a silent, primary level, man would know, or those of you who are good, I'd say that man does, quote, know, unquote, that intellectual conclusions are never final statements of fact. It would be suicidal. He operates, is why I say operationally it's so. He operates on the basis. You'd be insane to do otherwise, but you operate on the basis out there in the ordinary city, that which is conclusive. If you ask someone, where do I catch a bus? And they say, go down 2 blocks, hang a left, it'll be right in front of you. That's a conclusion. You hope it is, assuming you have to catch the bus. But it is not a conclusion in the sense it is a final statement of fact. It is a presently acceptable operating procedure. It is never, in the secondary world, it is never, that is conclusions. What seems to be the logical outcome, again, of whether it be some sort of large institutionalized thought, religiously, academically, the community, basis of morality, or whether it just be apparently your little individual spurts of conclusive thought. None of them are a final statement of fact. And there is that within the nervous system of man, and I do not infer anything subconsciously, I don't even infer anything psychologically, although that's what the basis of it is, that comes out about the idea of an unconscious mind. But there is the primary knowledge. It is silent, it's never going to be vocal, and it has not been traumatized, and it is not something that has to be pulled out. That's just kind of childish, kind of a crude awareness that humanity has of the workings of the nervous system, not that far removed from what religion represents at another older level. But there is this silent knowledge at the primary level that the secondary world does not make intellectually conclusive statements. It never arrives at a final statement of fact. Everyone knows that. You operate on the basis of knowing that. Your tongue cannot say it. It's not supposed to. But at the primary level, it is known that conclusions are not final statements of fact about anything. It is known that what you're doing is operating on the basis of what is a presently acceptable course of action. You, what appears to be nations, large institutions, what would seem to be their conclusion, even if they stand up and they say, we'll all charge and we're going to fight this battle. Thousands of people, or thousands of people, we're going to politically take this new position. We're going to do something conclusively. We have had enough. We're going to make our stand here. Again, assuming that this is just the sort of middle-class movement in the city. Nothing all that strange. Everyone involved, because we're talking about the nervous system of life itself, the people involved know that this is not conclusive. Now, they cannot say that. If they're asked, of course, you've got to even defend yourself more if you're in that kind of position about, are you people serious about this? And you have to pull yourself upright if you're, especially in the front ranks, or if you got a salary coming out of this. And you say, are we serious? Do we look serious? And of course, they always look ridiculous. It's why you have, well, if you're in the city in some kind of movement, you from a subversive view, you always look sort of silly. But you have to go, well, no. What do you mean? This is no joke. You must be insane, which is, again, the beautiful way in which life's arranged, because their view is, well, you must be nuts. And from that view, they're in the majority, it's true. Well, you're nuts. What do you mean, are we serious? What could be more serious than the political future of our great country, of my little tribe? What could be more serious? And you have got to be. You would be operationally proving yourself to be a bag of potato chips. If you did say, that's silly. If you're going to stand up in front of a parade, I don't care where you are, all the way from Bulgaria to Mississippi, and you're going to stand in front of a parade to ordinary people and say, wait a minute, all forms of nationalism or religious fervor for any particular group of people, any belief, all of you people are nuts. Jingoism is just a synonym for insanity. Then I assume that you have paid up your life insurance, at least figuratively speaking, because that is not true. That is part of the normal flow of city life. If, I'm not trying to prove this, which it can't be, of course, but where we were, at least you got lost, is the reason that all parades are subject. Thousands of people, they're marching there and the band's playing, the jets flying, and the priests waving their things, and one guy can stand out in the middle of the street and go, we're talking about him against hundreds of thousands of people, figuratively speaking, and can go, are you guys serious? And they'll go, wait. And thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, of course, I would hope right quick you'll go ahead and take this internally where it's important in your own neural operations. Are you people serious with this crap? And you will see hundreds of thousands of thoughts and neurons, people in the parade, pull themselves up and say, what do you mean are we serious? Would we be out here marching? Would we save our money? Would we leave home? Would we dress up in these these important looking uniforms like this if we weren't serious? There is no answer to that, folks, other than, well, you're right. I don't know. I guess it was the heat. And yet, back to where I hoped you hadn't lost your point, it's not psychological. It is the flow of energy. But I want you to see that the reason that they must respond to it is because it is the continuing, ongoing process of a movement of energy. If such an observation, I don't mean that I made it or you made it, but if somebody walked up to all religions or all political parties or all nationalistic leaders and said, you guys are nuts, whatever the hell that means. In other words, abject criticism, just you people are crazy, you don't know what you're doing. If in some way that was, from an ordinary view, true, what would happen? They would go, I'm going to have to play it out for you, they would go, my God, I never realized it. You're right, we have wasted our whole bloody life doing this. Jesus. God, thanks so much for pointing this out to us. May I suggest to you that this almost never happens. almost never happens. Well, when's the last time back in the city that someone walked up to you either with a certain edge to their voice or perhaps they apparently had your welfare at heart and went, may I tell you in some way how silly you're being? And how often has it happened in your life? And I use you people because you're obviously of superior intellect just looking at you. How often has that happened and you heard their criticism, maybe just directly, they said, you know, I've watched you and you have a certain potential, but basically you're crazy. And you went, God almighty, how can I ever repay you for pointing this out to me? How often has your parade stopped? And you say, wait, and all the soldiers, all the prime ministers, all the associates, all the assistants, all the foot soldiers, all the priests, all the cardinals, even down to the little sparrows. And everybody went, he's right. He's right. Thanks, praise be to Lamar for sending this man to bring us to our senses. If you could be suddenly brought to your senses, the parade would not simply stop and become enlightened. The parade, you would have hundreds of thousands of people drop dead. That's what you would have done if it could happen. May I suggest to you that it can happen up here is why people have such hesitation. They don't know why. But what they're about to do is kill a whole parade. They're about to slaughter a whole group, perhaps hundreds. I said thousands and hundreds of thousands when I was talking about people. I don't know whether we should lie to you and make you think you got that many different thoughts, but if you won't believe that, all right. At least we can say in the scores, in the dozens, that you're going to have that doesn't sound, you're going to have these hundreds of thousands of helpless thoughts that have been with you all these years, carried on, and you're suddenly just going to open up with this Gatling gun that you're not even sure what it's shooting. You just fell into it with a bad crowd here, and it's just like you're suddenly going to, turn it on yourself. Wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. I need more information. I got to know exactly what I'm doing. Do you think life doesn't look after its own? That's right. Well, no, some of this sounds all right, but wait a minute. I might go off the deep end. I'm sorry. I might do something weird. What if I thought something new and, God forbid, I didn't like it? What if I traveled all the way? I'm talking about all the way from Bird Station and went to the other end of the earth, and it was still cold. It was still icy and snowy. Who will I sue? Hey, don't look at me. The National Geographic would be, they got deep pockets. Whip a suit on them. Right, back to the secondary world in speech. We've hit this from all sorts of angles, but I just wanted to put it to you very directly. In the secondary world, literally, as far as the world that's alive, not dead parades and etc., not dead ideas, but there are no final statements of facts. There are no such things as conclusions. They're operational, they're acceptable present operations. It's doing the best you can. That's what it amounts to. There is no such thing in the secondary world as a final statement of fact. The closest thing to there being an end to any matter, an end to any affair in a finite world, is disappearance. Non-existence. What does they call it here? Death. Death. That is literally, it's not just being funny, that is in a finite, what we can talk about right now, to any degree, it's of any profit to even attempt, let's talk about the finite world here of a three-dimensional universe, or four for those of you that like that idea. What is the only final statement of fact? It is when the matter, in the case of a person, goes away. They go to live with Judge Crater. They go to live in Elvis's guitar case. There is simply no final statement of fact that is still existent. Now we're talking about the secondary world. We're talking about man's intellectual world. But I've got to back up and ask you one more time to consider what I started out in the B paragraph. When you first, if you were listening, think about to hear the statement that part of man's speech, part of the purpose of ongoing speech, is to be sure that man does not suffer, that man does not become confined, limited, and captive of that sorry state of conclusions. And any reasonable person's mind would go, that is truly insane. It's insane rhetorically, it is insane grammatically, it is insane scientifically. You cannot live. You cannot even speak. What you're calling the secondary world, I'm speaking now for ordinary people back to me, what you're calling the secondary world is absolutely dependent upon coming to conclusions. I know that. Except it's not really so. That's the way it operationally seems, but contrary. If the secondary world in any particular place comes to a conclusion, whatever that affair was, whatever that tributary was, disappears. It takes an apparent departure from a finite realm to approach anything resembling conclusiveness. Let's be real direct, without me having to apologize and warn you that it's not psychological. What I'm about to say is not simply psychological. Instead of calling it conclusions, from a more subversive view, rather than thinking about it as being conclusions, it is very directly, very simply, better stated, as being simply what is possible. I could weave more obtuse patterns to the back of that, but it's true at the ordinary level. It's true for operations at a most pedestrian level in life, and it is true no matter how far removed from street level city thinking you might get, because who's going to say you can ever do what you can't do? Nobody cannot do more than what's possible. But what apparently is conclusions in the secondary world ordinarily are not conclusions. Surely you see by now that they would be deadly. If they're conclusions, they're dead. As long as they're alive, even while people are calling them conclusions, what they are not final statements of fact regarding what's going on. It is people doing what's possible. It is the acceptable operational procedures that are possible right then. That is what is normally thought of, whether it's said directly or not, that is what is thought of as conclusions. And they are not. It is, you could call it that which is possible, or if you want to be a little more down home, I guess you could call it, it's what'll get you by for now. I guess we had our little joke to say more down home. That is actually extremely scientific. It is. It is so scientific that I don't know, I'm not even going to search for a better way of putting it. You can forget Nobel conversations with physicists and astronomers, and that's it. That is what science is. That's what the secondary world is. That's what speech is. That's what the human life is at the intellectual level. Not conclusions. Conclusions are suicidal if they could be done. What passes as conclusions are what will get you by for now. You, nations, life. It is life's own thinking process as manifested through man's thinking. To call it, to refer to it as doing what is possible, just consider a little offshoot of that very directly. To doing what is possible, there's one thing that's always possible, and that's to talk about it. There was a Kyroot a few nights ago that pointed out that if you don't know what to do, talk about it. That is no form of sarcasm, although Kyroots and I were aware, if any ordinary person heard it, what would make some of them interesting, that certainly an ordinary person could take that and put it on some kind of smart-ass T-shirt and think, yeah, isn't that just like other people? If you don't know what you're doing, talk about it. Yeah, and you could attack religion, psychiatry, people who own service stations, which enough's enough, but you can attack the whole secondary world on the basis of, hey, you don't know what you're doing? That's right, talk about it. Do I have to go any further? You people I can look in your faces, besides being intelligent, many of you have the inherent genes of world-class smartasses to begin with. So you can look at everybody from religious leaders to politicians to family to anybody. To anybody that wants to say, well, listen, wait a minute, I'll tell you what's going on. A mechanic. I'm going to tell you about your car. It's in there, you brought it back 3 times. One way to tell that the man does not know what he's doing is he'll continue to talk about, wait a minute. That is no form, that is no basis for a revolutionist to see or to feel any feeling of censure toward the ordinary world, because that's the basis of it. It's a sign that they're healthy. I'm not commenting on what that may do to the kind of money you're spending on your automobile, but you can't take every example and run with it forever. You got to look at your own affairs. I am pointing out, though, that if you do not know what to do, talk about it, but now, get away from those kind of examples of politicians and transmission specialists. Look at the way the nervous system works. Look at the way it works in you. There was a variation of it last meeting night of a Kyroot that said, some guy said, when in doubt, tell a personal anecdote. That's it. When in doubt, talk. That is not an attack. It is not a form of foolishness. It is not in some way point out that humanity has a very low level of intelligence. I'm sorry. Nobody likes that little piece of business, do they? It's kind of annoying, isn't it? I'll leave it to you to figure out why it's annoying. I don't want to think about it. The thing is, compared to the primary world, in the secondary world, no one knows what they're doing. If you reach any area where you know what you're doing, you have truly reached a conclusion, and that whatever the area was of interest in you, or whatever the question was, is dead. You simply forget about it. It no longer is of any interest. It is no longer a live wire in you. It is like a tributary, the main river of your own thinking, that has been dammed up, or it's dried up. If you do not know what to do, you talk about it. So if you do not know how to live, you talk about it. We're talking about the secondary now. We'll assume that you're sane enough in the primary and that you get along and you're basically healthy. And cursed or praise be to your own Lamar genes, but whatever you are, we'll assume that you're fairly sane sexually, eating-wise, and you just basically at that level from here down, from the level of consciousness from here down, that you're just run-of-the-mill. Just an ordinary, good old redneck, everyday New Jersey, Albanian, everybody else in the world. From here up, to say, when you don't know what you're doing, talk about it, is in no form criticism. This is, at the ordinary level, what keeps that going. Down here, it's otherwise. When you're hungry, eat. When you're tired, sleep. When you're horny, screw. Up here, it's when you don't know what you're doing, talk about it. And the unsaid part being, you never know what you're doing. There was another Kyroot, at least anybody take it as being a specific example, last time, that some reality, the rough quote was, that some reality told its local distributor on some planet, he said, all right, go ahead if you want to and start a religion. Get some followers, do whatever you want to, and as soon as you inevitably find out, just as soon as you guys realize you don't know what you're doing, start a building fund, a continual building fund drive, and everything will be all right. Now, I've already pulled that out as an example. That's not an attack on the building fund drive. That dynamic is the same part of not knowing what you're doing. Everybody from it gets a little, perhaps less vivid to you, but everything from a church, a religion, to a political party, down to a local book lovers club. Any kind of organization that takes on some sort of life that almost becomes institutional. That is, it has some effect on the immediate locale. And my library supporters club or Bud Marchers club may get too speculative for some of your thinking, but it's still true. There will always, if it takes on any life of its own, it'll always begin institutionally, as collectively, they always begin to believe that there's more to it than there is. that the Birdwatchers Club will almost take on some kind of mystical feeling. It's just part of being of a club, being in the Army. As dumb as that may seem to some women or you guys who spent the war in Canada, that you can think, God, if there's anything dumb and uninteresting life would be to be crowded in to South Carolina with a bunch of redneck people and get out there for 9 weeks and tramp through the mud and have to do something. I just barely got out of church and religion myself, and they got you going, hey, say, never, hey, now sit down. Simon says, and I'm going to do all that. Boy, is that dumb. But how do you explain the fact? Not to prove it, but I'm just pointing out to you. You get in there, and you can think, well, I was originally a conscientious objector, and somehow I got tricked into this. And first thing you know, though, you get through and they hand out the berets or the, some kind of silk thing, and you put it on, and suddenly you and the other guys look at each other, and it's almost like, is Camelot actually coming back alive? Are we part? Any group that takes on life, it becomes. And it's nothing to do with groups, remember. We've already talked about this. The secondary world has to continually pretend, in a sense, to be more than it is, to even be what it is. And so a library club, a birdwatcher society, they get a feeling that it's more than it is. Nothing improper, but they do. So the feeling. Now, if that's too strange, back to religions. Still assuming that all of you understand it's no attack on religion. They're not any more worthy of attack than a birdwatcher society. But in religions, insofar as their stated aim, just like psychiatry and etc., their stated aims cannot be met. So from that view, if you could grab everybody in religions and in some way squeeze the, quote, truth out of them, all the way from the popes to the head rabbis and everybody, and say, do you know what you're doing? They'd go, no! I've got no idea. I got this idea that something I itch, which everybody does. In other words, I want to grow, and this is the best I can do. And in fact, some way I believe I end up here in charge of this thing. But do you know what it's all about? Got no idea. So what do? Then you have to pretend to do something else. You have to go into a collateral matter. You have to do the best you can. Well, let's see. Since we don't know what we're doing, here's what we'll do. Start a building fund drive. We need a new church. Or here we are. We start out being bird watchers, but it's become much more than that. We've attracted such a high class of people that this is more than just a bird watcher society. And we're running out of time. Surely you guys can fill in some of this. If it really takes off, and I don't mean that they become all that weird, but the people involved feel as though it's really more to it than just going out and looking at birds. There is something more to it. But if you ask them what, and you could strangle them too, they'd go, I don't know. They're not supposed to know, but they're supposed to be the feeling that there's more to this. And it's not just the clubs, because you must do that in life if you're ordinary. To ask people in life, is all it is paying off your mortgage? Trying to hang on to your marriage until, as they say, the kids grow up and leave so that you can leave the old man or the old lady to try and pay off the car? Is that all life is? And everybody, their nervous system, it's not psychological, their nervous system has to come out with some sort of story of, God, I hope not. No, it can't be. Which then you're into religion, etc., because the obvious answer is, what do you mean it can't be? I mean, do you have any proof otherwise? Hand me a Bible, give me a Koran, give me something. But the actual truth is, the obvious, tangible truth, when you say, is this all life's about? And of course, you're not talking to the primary level in anybody, you're talking to their secondary level. You couldn't be talking. And you say, is this all life's about? Everyone has to say, no. You say no forcefully, like, no, I know that there's a life after this, or I know that things will get better for me in this life. But if you say, is this all it is, what you're doing now, it's all the way from, no, I know that someday I'll be living with Allah, all the way from that to somebody going, oh God, I hope not. So you got the full spectrum, but none of them have any basis for that. You're back to what I'm saying. The secondary world must continually reinvent itself, and it must pretend, and you must, that things are more than they are, or they would not even be what little bit they are now. Continued next time, Rangers. Be sure and bring your decoder ring